The girl was almost done baking. A frothing, bubbling mass sputtered out of the arrangement of vials and tubes in front of the girl's face, emitting a familiar stench. "This stuff is good," the girl thought. "Perhaps even worthy of showing to Granny." One of the oldest in the business, Granny held a good chunk of LA Candy traffic, serving Pasadena and Glendale and most of the shantytown ghettos sprawling northwards into what had been the Angeles National Forest. The cranky old bitch paid well, but was obsessed with quality control. Other dealers turned a blind eye to brewers mixing all sorts of junk, from shoe soles to machine oil, and you'd think Granny would be forced out of business by the dampened prices. But no, she knew her clientele. They might not have a tent to sleep in, but were willing to pay in full for the good stuff Granny offered. A guaranteed sweet hit for 3 credits, or a 50-50 crapshoot for 2. Once they'd wasted their 3 weeks worth of begging, looting, and stealing, only to get a dummy pill or a bad trip, they all got cured for good from such gambling. The girl sorted the pills, still hot, into flat aluminum cans with twist-on caps, dropped them in an over-the-shoulder bag, threw on a radiation suit and adjusted the mask. Stained blood red with leftover reagents in an accident in the dawn of her career, and roughed up with knife cuts over the years in business, the suit shaved off a decade or so of her life expectancy. She did not expect to live that long anyways, and refused to waste money on a new one even when her skin had developed bleached white patches under the suit cuts. She was now known as Red Riding Hood, a branding only a fool would abandon. The girl made it past the broken elevator stained with human refuse, and down the corroded fire escape stairs that wobbled and squeaked underfoot. In the back alley, a disheveled hobo sat leaning against an overfilled dumpster and appeared to sleep. He lunged forward like some crazed animal as the girl squeezed past, but a swift boot to the teeth sent him crawling back, whimpering and wiping his bloodied mouth. Red Riding Hood made a few steps away, turned, and came back. The man's glazed eyes bored into her with renewed hope and greed. He reached forth a cupped hand, mumbling something unintelligible. The girl took out her blast pistol and discharged it into his head, melting it into a shapeless charred mass. The body collapsed, blood oozing onto the pavement, creeping towards the girl's shoes. She pranced away at the last moment, like a child playing with ocean waves, then strode onto the streets. Mother always told her to solve problems before they got a chance to solve her. If a past gets aggressive, it has to be dealt with. The chore done lifted her spirits, and she jumped on a hoverbus thinking herself a good, responsible girl. Inside the hoverbus, passengers crowded around the news vid screen, old-fashioned crowd-big radiation masks making them look like a murder of plague doctors studying a corpse. In no mood for a contest of jutting elbows, Red Riding Hood amped on her electric whip. It swung by her side, crackling with high-voltage discharge. A man in the last row turned around at the sound, saw the whip, and tapped his neighbor on the shoulder. The subtle touch gained more attention than all the jostling done before, as each man went on to tap the one in front of him. Soon, all eyes were on the girl. The crowd parted, hastily making way. The vidscreen showed a breaking news announcement. A grotesque wanted poster with a blank mannequin instead of the face, unknown for name and surname, NA for eye color and height. The only useful info, Venusian mimic for race, and the breaking news part, Los Angeles as its new presumed location. All this fuss for that? The girl asked, eyeing the crowd. A few shameful nods. Red Riding Hood lifted her visor, spat on the floor under the man's feet, and went on to sit in the back row. The story had rang across the world for 2 weeks already. Nothing new. A mimic can change its visuals at will, and was even said to assume its victims' personalities. It had murdered a colony cargo pilot and impersonated him upon returning to Earth, fooling the dead man's wife for a full week. No way to identify the thing, no actionable suggestions. Panic for the panic's sake, as where there is panic, there is profit for the news outlets. For all she knew, the whole story was a sham. Money and trust never shared the same roof. The girl recalled another of her mother's teachings as the gently rocking hoverbus lulled her into a contemplative mood. A curious thought struck her. She must have been old enough to understand her mother's teachings when they got separated. How come then she remembered nothing of her looks? Fumes she breathed and candy batches she sampled must have taken their toll. Her memory was failing. If Granny buys the batch, the girl resolved, she would get a new filter for her brewing mask, and from now on, she will always use a tester. That it cost nothing. There was no lack of volunteers, one just had to watch their back with them. She got off on St. Hill Avenue and made her way into the old Caltech campus. The girl's heavy steps echoed through the cloistered walkway done in what she thought of as contemporary American style, graffiti-covered Spanish architecture with an OD junkie under every other column, frothing at the mouth or soiling themselves. Red Riding Hood punched in the code and, when the 3 layers of chrome-covered doors opened, went inside. The spacious corridor reverberated with moans of bodily satisfaction coming from the halls and auditoriums that Granny kept clean and guarded for her VIP regulars. One of the side doors opened, reluctant and heavy under its protective lead padding. The sounds of the orgy inside were deafening. A burly security guard emerged in the doorframe and dragged a naked unconscious girl out. He made a second trip to fetch her clothes that he threw onto the floor beside her, and a wad of bills that he stuck in her mouth, a reward for the performance. In Granny's dominion, everybody was treated fairly, even hookers. The dean's office that Granny occupied was just a few steps away. Red Riding Hood braced herself for the meeting, old and ugly. Granny gave her the creeps. The face mashed with wrinkles and scars and deformed by a gunshot that had flattened the bridge of her nose, hypersensitive eyes bulging out of orbits under a protruding forehead, reflex and brainstem therapy side effects, hands covered in pallid skin peeling from chemical burns, ring finger missing a phalanx, a memo from an angered creditor, and a negotiation tactic Granny used lavishly when she became a creditor herself. Red Riding Hood was not of a queasy bunch, but to see Granny was to look into a time-bending mirror, showing the girl what she herself was to become. She lifted her mask and pressed her face against the cold metal of the retina scanner. A moment later, the door slid open.
"Come in, child,"
Granny said without looking up from her desk covered with lab equipment. Pipettes and reagents, 2 microscopes, a portable centrifuge and an assortment of drills and probes for sample collection. With no chair to sit in, Red Riding Hood stood awkwardly in front of Granny's desk, while the hostess arranged bits and pieces of her drug testing toolkit, asserting dominance over the waiting visitor through slow, incisive movements. At last she looked up, making the girl recoil at the sight and take a step back. What had been the ugly gunshot scar in the middle of Granny's face was now a petite, perfectly normal nose. Recent news came back to the girl in a flash, sending a chill along her spine.
"Got patched up, my child. 'Twas getting difficult to breathe lately,"
Granny said, answering the unasked question. Perhaps the mimic didn't evolve to emulate such deformities, Red Riding Hood thought.
"You are all shaking, my dear. Come, sit down,"
Granny said. She pushed a button and a chair slid from under the floor.
"Let's see what you've got for me today."
The girl sat, watching Granny's movements intently, hand hovering near the blaster. Of course, she thought. Granny was a perfect target. With police thoroughly bribed, with guards all around, the mimic will now be invincible. The girl put the candy cans on the desk and pushed them towards Granny. Better to play along, she thought. Maybe the mimic is now content with where it is. Maybe it will live off its life as Granny, and nobody, except Granny, will be disadvantaged by the substitution. She watched Granny, or the thing impersonating her, go through the familiar motions, opening every can, lining up the pills in front of her, boring a tiny hole in each, taking samples. How could the mimic know Granny so well? Could its mental emulation go that deep? She'd heard the thing could scan its victim's brain fully, down to every neuron, every synapse. Some even said it could reinstate a false consciousness, making the infested dummy not aware of what it was. An absurd hoax born of panic-ridden society. Red Riding Hood watched for discrepancies, but every tilt of the head, every unconscious hum and facial expression of the old woman's face, it was all good old Granny, as she always was. Perhaps it is Granny, the girl thought. Perhaps I overreacted. Let the news hysteria get to me, despite all the bravado. The door buzzed, and a vidscreen on its side showed 2 cops in Drug Enforcement Administration uniform peering uncertainly into the retina scanner.
"What the devil?"
Granny muttered, her lip quivering with disgust. She produced a journal from a drawer and flipped through a couple of pages, consulting her records.
You hounds got your bone this month already,
she snapped into the intercom.
Go talk to your boss. It's not my problem if he's chewing it alone.
The cops gestured to the camera, pointing pathetically at their mouths.
Speak, but fast,
Granny said, punching another button, switching on the internal microphone.
Mrs. Stewart, could we please have a moment? It's a delicate business,
the two pleaded, flaunting a black suitcase in front of the camera. Delicate business meant someone high up was to be framed, and the pay was always good.
Sorry, my dear. It will only take a minute,
Granny said to Red Riding Hood, and opened the door. The cops burst in, unholstering blasters from their suitcase and aiming them at Granny. When they noticed Red Riding Hood, one of them switched his aim to her. Despite the uniform, the two were not the usual DEA officers, whom one can always spot by the timid glazed eyes of a canned D addict, deep set on a gaunt, scrawny face. No, these two gazed at Granny with the fearless, brainwashed stare of the top-breed, steroid-fueled special forces.
Are you out of your...
The old woman started, but one of the cops, slightly shorter and bulkier of the two, interrupted her.
You two are under arrest for double homicide, unlawful interplanetary travel, and double identity theft.
The man growled.
One of you, that is. Which we'll figure out shortly,
he added amiably, unclicking the safety lock on his blaster.
Her face is different. Ask anyone.
Red Riding Hood burst out.
I saw her a month ago. She had no nose.
That's so.
The burly cop gruffed with a grim smile, both cops now pointing their guns at Granny.
Trying to set me up, you little whore?
Granny hissed.
How much did they pay you? What is the price for your worthless?
Without breaking the cadence of her speech, Granny raised a blaster from under her desk and trained it on Red Riding Hood. But, pumped with stimulants as Granny was, her aging brain was no match for that of the two young cops whizzed up on state-provided pills. The two fired, blasting Granny's torso out of existence. Her arm, having nothing to connect to, flopped on the desk with a dull thud. The old hand, still squeezing the blaster, twitched and fired around, leaving a charred hole in the wall 2 feet in diameter. A chunk of Granny's spine jutted out of the soup of intestines, like a white spoon out of a hearty stick-to-your-ribs stew. Pills or not, the mimic was first to realize what the human remains meant. With its left hand, it pulled out the blaster holstered to its red suit and shot a hole through the first cop's chest. With its right, it swung the electric whip, disarming the second. The cop made a motion to clutch the stump of his wrist, but never did so, as another calculated swing cut off his head clean, searing the wound at the same time. Not a drop of blood, the mimic thought with a smile. The uniform will be handy.
Hi guys, I wrote this story as an exercise to improve my writing, but it turned out well and I decided to share it. If you like the story, or if you want to find out more about how to approach this and other creative ways to improve your writing, please subscribe to my channel. By the way, the phallic atrocities that you're seeing right now is what Midjourney generated to a thumbs up prompt. I hope that these images speak directly to your subconscious and make you click this like button, because I have a tiny channel and every like matters a lot. Now that being said, please enjoy the rest of the story, although keep in mind, it's a little gory.
The mimic leaned the decapitated body against the wall and placed the severed head onto the neck stump. Morphing the tip of its index finger into a needle, the creature slid it through the dead man's temple. It shuddered in pleasure at the tingling sensation of adapter cells disgorged into a new host. The adapters were fast at work, analyzing the brain, consuming the primitive human entrails, and rebuilding the body to the superior Venusian design. A tangle of pale white fibers writhed out of the dead man's wrist, squirming and groping at the air like earthworms being cut apart with a dull knife. The mimic brought the missing hand closer, and the fibers slid smoothly into it, sealing the cut. Its body complete, the puppet began twitching. Methodical, rhythmical pulsing of his toes slowly advanced up to the knees, hips, and torso, as if the corpse was following a perverse body scan meditation. Done with basic reflex testing, the creature concentrated, guiding the adapter's progress into higher nervous functions. Young and inexperienced, it had allowed 2 mistakes already. It could not afford another. It made the girl's construct too strong, too self-consistent, which turned the mimic into a silent observer until reality proved the construct wrong. The cargo pilot was not consistent enough and got caught. This time, it must get it right. After 5 minutes of excruciating labor, new aspects emerged in the creature's sensations. A faint image of a young girl in a red suit, peering into its eyes intently. A nagging pain in the neck and wrist. A hard, cold metal of the wall pressed against its back. The cop puppet was regaining consciousness. The mimic now had 2. The cop rose and rubbed his neck. The scar was barely visible and was quickly fading away. He produced a few groans and shrieks, testing his new vocal cords. At last, he reached for the intercom and pressed a button.
"Greg is down, but I've got this scumbag,"
he said. He escorted Red Riding Hood out of the room. The girl obediently stumbled along, her head bowed down, arms cuffed behind the back. Only a trickle of awareness was left inside. Now that the girl puppet was under full control, the mimic was regretful to dispose of it. It was a good body, though not as good as being free of suspicion. Any human would give up an arm to save his life. Why would the mimic not give up this appendage, considering that it would soon get as many of them as it wanted? The cop's emulated mind functioned well, displaying nuanced human emotion. Grieving respectfully for the loss of a partner he never liked too much, he was already planning how to spend the hefty bonus for the catch. A vacation on Ganymede with his wife and kids sounded just about right. A resort full of lower-class drunken tourists. Nobody would bat an eye if one of them went missing for an hour or 2. The cop chuckled. Of all the things in the trip, it was the drunken tourists that he was yearning to see the most.